In 1953, the Hollywood industry was desperately fighting to win back audiences from the growing threat of television. Studios were experimenting with new technologies like widescreen CinemaScope and the short-lived 3D craze. But not every gamble paid off. For every From Here to Eternity or Shane that struck box office gold, there were spectacular failures that sent studio executives into panic mode. These weren't just mediocre performers. They were financial catastrophes that damaged careers, depleted studio coffers, and, in some cases, nearly drove filmmakers to desperate measures. Let's dive straight into it and talk about the 13 biggest box office disasters from 1953 that made Hollywood executives very worried. Our journey into 1953 Hollywood's financial failures begins with a noir thriller that has virtually disappeared from public consciousness. Jennifer starred the talented Ida Lupino alongside her real-life husband Howard Duff in what should have been a compelling gothic mystery. The film was released during the transition period when Monogram Pictures was rebranding itself as Allied Artists, hoping to shed its reputation for cheap B-movies. The premise had potential. Lupino played Agnes Langley, a woman who takes a job as caretaker at a spooky, isolated mansion where the previous caretaker, Jennifer, mysteriously vanished. What follows is a psychological thriller with Lupino discovering clues suggesting Jennifer met with foul play. Despite having legendary cinematographer James Wong Howe behind the camera, the film failed to attract audiences. Part of the failure stemmed from the studio's limited promotional budget, but critics also found fault with the film's abrupt ending and inconsistent pacing. The real tragedy is that Lupino, who was pioneering as one of Hollywood's few female directors at the time, saw her acting career suffer another setback with this commercial disappointment. Jennifer quickly faded into obscurity, becoming a footnote in the careers of everyone involved, its financial losses contributing to the ongoing struggles of Allied Artists to be taken seriously as more than just a B-movie factory. Few would expect a Western featuring rising star Robert Wagner alongside established cowboys Dale Robertson and Rory Calhoun to flop. But The Silver Whip defied those expectations. Based on the novel First Blood by Jack Schaefer, the same author who wrote Shane, this should have been a safe bet for 20th Century Fox. Instead, it became one of their rare misfires in the usually reliable Western genre. The film told the story of a young stagecoach driver, Wagner, caught between the influence of a by-the-book sheriff, Calhoun, and a more trigger-happy mentor, Robertson. Despite solid performances and impressive stagecoach action sequences, the film was released just days after MGM's much more successful The Naked Spur, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Industry insiders reported that The Silver Whip failed to reach even the $1 million mark in gross revenues, earning less than Fox's other commercial disappointment that year, Powder River. For Wagner, it was a learning experience early in his career, but for the studio, it was a painful reminder that even a genre as reliable as the Western could deliver a financial blow when audiences had better options at other theaters. RKO Studios was desperate to make a splash in 1953 after being temporarily shut down due to corporate turmoil involving owner Howard Hughes. Their answer was Second Chance, a thriller starring Robert Mitchum, Linda Darnell, and Jack Palance that had all the ingredients for success: star power, exotic Mexican locations, and the trendy new 3D technology that was supposed to lure television viewers back to theaters. The film followed a washed-up boxer, Mitchum, who becomes entangled with a gangster's former girlfriend, Darnell, while a hitman, Palance, pursues them. The climactic sequence featuring a dangling cable car suspended over a deep canyon should have been a showstopper in 3D, but by the time Second Chance hit theaters, audiences were already growing weary of the gimmick. Critics acknowledged the thrilling finale, but found the rest of the film dull and predictable. Mitchum himself disliked the experience so much that he had no trouble sharing his negative opinions with gossip columnist Hedda Hopper, much to the studio's dismay. It would be the last film he made at RKO, ending a 10-year relationship on a sour note. For a studio already in financial trouble, Second Chance represented a missed opportunity to re-establish itself as a major player, and the significant investment in 3D technology and location shooting failed to pay off at the box office. Even superstars like Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr weren't immune to box office disasters in 1953. Their romantic comedy Dream Wife seemed like a safe bet for MGM, pairing two beloved actors in a battle of the sexes story directed by Sidney Sheldon, who would later become a best-selling novelist. Instead, it became one of the year's most surprising failures. The premise centered on an American businessman, Grant, who decides his career-minded fiancée, Kerr, isn't feminine enough, so he pursues a Middle Eastern princess, Betta St. John, who's been raised to cater to men. This outdated concept might have worked in the 1940s, but by 1953, it struck many as painfully old-fashioned and borderline offensive. Critics savaged the film, with one reviewer calling it as funny as a toothache. Audiences stayed away in droves, leaving MGM with a substantial loss on what should have been a guaranteed hit. The failure was so complete that the film virtually disappeared from public consciousness, unlike other Grant comedies that are still celebrated today. For Grant, it was a rare misstep in an otherwise stellar career, while for MGM, it was a warning sign that even the most bankable stars couldn't save a concept that had passed its expiration date. William Cameron Menzies was renowned as one of Hollywood's greatest production designers, having created the visual look of classics like Gone with the Wind. When he directed The Maze for Allied Artists in 1953, expectations were high for a stylish 3D horror film. The result was a box office disaster that couldn't recoup its modest budget despite its atmospheric visuals. Starring Richard Carlson as a man whose fiancée follows him to a mysterious Scottish castle where he's undergone a strange transformation, the film built tension effectively for most of its running time. But it's the bizarre revelation in the final act that left audiences more bewildered than frightened. Without spoiling the ending for those who haven't seen it, let's just say it involves one of the most unexpected monsters in cinema history. Critics who saw The Maze in 3D praised some of the depth effects, particularly in the castle's labyrinthine corridors, but found the story increasingly preposterous. Marketed as a serious horror film, word of mouth about its unintentionally humorous climax killed its commercial prospects. Coming relatively late in the brief 3D cycle, when audience enthusiasm for the format was already waning, The Maze failed to attract sufficient viewership to break even, despite Menzies' visual flair and Carlson's credibility in the science fiction genre. Columbia Pictures was determined not to miss the 3D bandwagon in 1953, rushing Man in the Dark into production as their first entry in the format. The studio was in such a hurry that they completed the entire shoot in just 11 days, hoping to beat Warner Bros.' House of Wax to theaters. They succeeded by a mere 2 days, but the victory proved hollow when their film failed to capture the public's imagination, or their wallets. Starring Edmund O'Brien as a criminal who undergoes experimental brain surgery to cure his criminal tendencies, the film had an intriguing premise. After the procedure, he can't remember where he hid $130,000 from his last heist, but his former partners are determined to extract that information by any means necessary. The 3D effects were deployed mainly for shock value. A scene where a spider dangles in front of the camera and a roller coaster sequence were particularly designed to make audiences jump. Despite being first to market, Man in the Dark was quickly overshadowed by House of Wax, which featured better production values, more convincing 3D effects, and the star power of Vincent Price. Columbia's hastily produced noir couldn't compete, and its box office returns fell far short of expectations. The lesson was clear: being first wasn't enough if the product couldn't deliver a memorable experience, and the failure of Man in the Dark showed that 3D alone couldn't save an otherwise forgettable B-movie. Perhaps the most fascinating box office disaster of 1953 was Columbia Pictures' The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, the only original live-action feature film written by children's author Dr. Seuss. With a budget of around $2 million, a significant sum at the time, this surreal musical fantasy was designed to be a family-friendly spectacle. Instead, it became a financial catastrophe that Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel, would later try to disown. The film tells the story of a young boy who dreams that his tyrannical piano teacher, Dr. Terwilliger, has imprisoned him and 499 other children in a massive piano-playing institution. The dreamscape is pure Seuss: bizarre architecture, strange contraptions, and whimsical design elements that anticipate his later animated adaptations. But in 1953, audiences weren't prepared for such an experimental, sometimes unsettling children's film. Columbia had expected a commercial hit that would capitalize on Dr. Seuss's popularity. What they got instead was a film that frightened children and confused adults. Test screenings went so poorly that the studio demanded extensive cuts, leaving the final release version significantly shorter and less coherent than originally intended. The result was a box office bomb that barely made back a fraction of its production costs. Dr. Seuss was so traumatized by the experience that he never wrote another original screenplay. Decades later, The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T would gain recognition as a cult classic, but in 1953, it was simply a costly mistake that hurt Columbia's bottom line and damaged Dr. Seuss's Hollywood aspirations. When Columbia Pictures cast Rita Hayworth in a 3D adaptation of Somerset Maugham's controversial story Rain, retitled Miss Sadie Thompson, they expected her star power would guarantee success. After all, Hayworth had been one of Hollywood's most bankable actresses throughout the 1940s. What they didn't anticipate was a troubled production that would lead to one of the year's most disappointing box office performances. The story of a free-spirited woman clashing with a repressed missionary on a South Pacific island had already been filmed twice before, as a silent film with Gloria Swanson and most famously with Joan Crawford in 1932. Hayworth's version added musical numbers to showcase her dancing talents, but this diluted the power of the original story. The production was further hampered by Hayworth's personal problems and her deteriorating relationship with Columbia boss Harry Cohn. Released in December 1953, Miss Sadie Thompson received mixed reviews and failed to recoup its considerable production costs. The 3D presentation, which was supposed to be a major selling point, actually deterred some viewers who found the technology headache-inducing. For Hayworth, it represented another step in her decline from Hollywood's pinnacle. For Columbia, it was a costly reminder that even established stars couldn't guarantee success when a production was compromised by behind-the-scenes issues and questionable artistic choices. Not all box office failures lack artistic merit. The Little Fugitive, an independent film about a young boy who runs away to Coney Island after being tricked into believing he's killed his older brother, is now considered a landmark of American independent cinema. In 1953, however, it failed to find a significant audience despite critical acclaim. Shot on a shoestring budget with a mostly non-professional cast, the film pioneered a documentary-like approach that would later influence the French New Wave and filmmakers like John Cassavetes. It even won the Silver Lion at the Venice Film Festival and was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. But commercial success eluded it during its initial release, as mainstream audiences weren't accustomed to such naturalistic storytelling. The film's directors, Maurice Engel, Ruth Orkin, and Raymond Abrashkin, struggled to secure widespread distribution. And while The Little Fugitive did manage to play in art house theaters, it never earned enough to be considered a financial success. Ironically, the film that couldn't find its audience in 1953 was selected for preservation in the Library of Congress's National Film Registry in 1997 for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Its commercial failure serves as a reminder that artistic innovation often comes at a financial cost, and that true recognition sometimes takes decades rather than opening weekend box office returns. 20th Century Fox's Inferno represented another ambitious attempt to capitalize on the 3D trend, this time with a desert survival story starring Robert Ryan. Despite impressive Technicolor visuals and a strong performance from Ryan, the film joined the growing list of 3D disappointments that failed to connect with audiences in 1953. The premise was compelling. A wealthy businessman, Ryan, is left to die in the desert by his unfaithful wife, Rhonda Fleming, and her lover, William Lundigan. Rather than perish, he uses his wits and determination to survive while plotting revenge. The 3D format was used effectively to convey the vastness of the desert landscape and the protagonist's increasing desperation, with critics praising the film's intelligent approach to the technology. But Inferno faced the same problem as many other 3D releases that year: audience fatigue with the format and the discomfort of wearing special glasses. Released late in the 3D cycle, when the novelty had worn off, it failed to attract enough viewers to offset its production costs. For Fox, which had invested heavily in new technologies to combat the television threat, Inferno represented another costly misstep. The film's failure contributed to the studio's decision to focus instead on CinemaScope for its technological edge, effectively abandoning 3D as a commercially viable format. If there's one film from 1953 that defines the concept of so bad it's good, it's Robot Monster. Made for the astonishingly low budget of $16,000, this sci-fi disaster tells the story of an alien invader, memorably portrayed by a man in a gorilla suit wearing a diving helmet who has destroyed most of humanity but falls in love with one of the few survivors. The production values were abysmal even by B-movie standards. The alien, named Roman, communicates with his leader through a bubble machine, dinosaur footage is randomly inserted from older films, and the plot makes little logical sense. Yet, director Phil Tucker managed to secure 3D cameras and distribution through Astor Pictures, hoping the gimmick would draw curious viewers. Robot Monster was savaged by critics and became an industry joke, with reports that Tucker was so distraught over the film's reception that he attempted suicide, though he survived and later disputed the story. Ironically, despite its reputation as one of the worst films ever made, Robot Monster actually turned a profit due to its minuscule budget, eventually earning around $1 million through exploitation marketing that emphasized its unintentional comedy. While financially it might not qualify as a true disaster, its critical failure was so complete that it deserves inclusion on any list of 1953's most notorious cinematic misfires. Decades later, it would find new life through late-night television showings and a memorable appearance on Mystery Science Theater 3000. John Huston directing Humphrey Bogart from a script by Truman Capote sounds like a formula for success, not failure. Yet, Beat the Devil became one of 1953's most notorious box office disasters, puzzling and alienating audiences who couldn't quite figure out what they were watching. The film's commercial failure is a textbook case of being too far ahead of its time. The production itself was chaotic. Huston and Capote reportedly wrote much of the screenplay day by day during filming in Italy, often giving the actors their lines just before shooting. The story, a parody of film noir conventions involving a group of misfits scheming to acquire uranium deposits in Africa, deliberately subverted audience expectations with its cynical tone and lack of traditional heroes. Critics were divided, with many dismissing the film outright while others recognized its innovative approach. Audiences, however, were largely confused and disappointed, expecting a straightforward thriller rather than the quirky, self-aware comedy they got. Beat the Devil lost money for its producers and damaged Bogart's commercial standing. It was the first film from his independent production company that failed to turn a profit. The film's reputation has been completely rehabilitated over time, with many critics now considering it a cult classic and a forerunner to the self-referential cinema that would emerge decades later. But in 1953, its commercial failure was a stark reminder that audiences weren't always ready for innovation, even from Hollywood's most respected talents. Our final entry in 1953's box office disasters is Invaders from Mars, a science fiction film that struggled financially upon release, but would later be recognized as an influential classic of the genre. Directed by William Cameron Menzies, who also helmed The Maze the same year, this tale of alien invasion seen through a child's eyes was too disturbing for family audiences and too juvenile for adults. The story follows a young boy who witnesses a flying saucer landing near his home and discovers that the aliens are taking control of the townspeople, including his parents. The film's surreal, dreamlike quality and distorted sets created a genuinely unsettling atmosphere, but also confused viewers accustomed to more straightforward storytelling. The special effects, while innovative for the time, stretched the modest budget to its breaking point without achieving the spectacle of bigger productions. Released during the early Cold War era, when science fiction often served as an allegory for communist infiltration fears, Invaders from Mars couldn't find a large enough audience to recoup its costs. It wasn't until later decades when it began appearing on television and influencing a generation of filmmakers, including Steven Spielberg, that its artistic value was fully appreciated. The film's commercial failure in 1953 is particularly ironic, given that it later inspired a big-budget remake in 1986, proof that sometimes the most financially unsuccessful films can have the longest cultural impact. As we've seen, 1953 was a year of both innovation and financial calamity for Hollywood. The industry's desperate attempts to combat television's growing popularity led to experiments that didn't always pay off, particularly the short-lived 3D craze that claimed so many victims on our list. Yet, there's a fascinating epilogue to many of these commercial disasters. Films like The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, Beat the Devil, and Invaders from Mars have found appreciative audiences decades after their initial failures, proving that commercial success and artistic merit don't always align. Some of these flops were simply ahead of their time, while others serve as valuable reminders of the risks inherent in filmmaking. Perhaps the most poignant lesson from 1953's box office disasters is that cinema history isn't written on opening weekend. Some of the year's biggest hits are now forgotten, while some of its most notorious failures have secured a place in film history that their more successful contemporaries might envy. In the ever-changing world of Hollywood, sometimes even the costliest mistakes can ultimately become treasured classics. They just might take a few decades to get there.